I am unashamed. What about you?
So welcome back to Unashamed. I'm in the last few episodes in the Southern Layer. Southern Layer number 1, I guess. I'm getting me a new studio ready, Zach. So I'll send you the bill. But Jace, so what did you do during the weekend? I know, you like the way I dropped that?
Well, yeah, it's been a little bit of a whirlwind, but Phil, we announced about Phil's condition, and which in our world, which come back to kind of bite me. We do something on this podcast, but it doesn't air for 4 or 5 days, so you forget that even happened. And actually, during that little transition time, Phil had a little bit of a reprieve from, his pain, although his overall conditions remained the same. He just felt better. We had gone down and had lunch with him, Missy and I, because, if you bring him really good food, we can persuade him to eat. But which is funny. We've all realized that us as Robertsons are food snobs.
Yes, good.
So we had to upgrade the menu, and all of a sudden, he was more. And some of that is from his condition. He's not hungry and at all, and so he just has to make himself eat. But he had a little reprieve from the pain, and I really feel like it was just the prayers, because for months he's been on a downward decline, and it was so crazy that 2 or 3 days later, when we went down, after I had just seen him, which I told my son, you need to go see him, because he was just, I think, at the lowest point in this whole process. And so a couple of days later, we go down there and have lunch with him. And it was the first time I really seen some improvement. He felt a little better, and we had a good conversation, and he was kind of in tune with the conversation. And so it was really nice. And really, the last few days, he's been like that. So I went to Kansas for 2 days to go hunting. And so because I have a buddy up there, he said, if you come up here, Zach, he said it would be fantastical. And I thought, fantastical. And I didn't think that was a word, but he's a really smart guy. And I said, I've never heard that word. What does it mean? And he said, this hunt will be somewhere between epic and hunting with Jesus.
Fantastical.
So I actually looked that word up, and guess what? It's not a word. So I think he meant fantastical.
Fantastic.
But I never brought it up again because he was allowing us to hunt. And the first day was really good. The second day was the opposite of fantastical. It's a struggle. And then we.
It reminds me of Johnny Howard. Corey's dad always says fantastico, which is not a word either, but it just sounds good.
But I did want to say that because when he described, I did think, boy, hunting, when you think of hunting, I mean, to put it somewhere between epic and hunting with Jesus, I thought, well, that's quite a statement.
Yeah, that's
I've never even thought about Jesus hunting. I mean,
I don't know about that. I'd have to think about the theology around that second part. But the first part, what was the bottom of the rung? That we know the top rung was hunting with Jesus. What was the bottom?
He said it'll be epic. I think that's
so. All you got to do is get over epic, and then he's technically right.
Epic's pretty strong. So the first day was epic, but the whatever is below epic, somewhere between almost nothing. But we actually
once you say with Jesus, then that's the top of the rung.
Yeah.
So that's always going to be the upper end of the the parentheses. That's always going to be the upper echelon.
Yeah, but I did want to say that did during the hunt, because when you're sitting there hunting all day, you talk about various things. Yeah. And he did ask the question based on us having that discussion. He said, are there animals in heaven, do you think? And I said, well, I believe there's going to be fish. And he looked at me. Of course, I wanted him to say, "Why do you believe that?" But it was just a long pause in the duck blind. Everybody, their minds were racing. So do y'all know?
I know why you.
You know why I'm going with that?
Oh yeah,
somebody's been studying their Bible.
I know exactly.
And so I then quoted John 21 from memory. We had the post-resurrection Jesus who orchestrates a massive haul of fish, 153 to be exact, without a mesh being torn. And then he tells Peter to go get the fish, and then he organizes a little, it wasn't a fish fry because they were on the bank, so there wouldn't have been any olive oil, but he might have. But he cooks these fish. I mean, there are olive trees. I've been there. There's olive trees everywhere. I'm not sure how he prepared the fish, but here's a resurrected human who is now eating fish, and we know he wouldn't have been eating the fish because to provide sustenance so he could continue to live, because he's in
a glorified body now.
Eating is now optional, and he chose to do that. So I concluded from that, why is he doing that?
Because it tastes good.
I think he's given us a glimpse of there's some things in the afterlife. You know, when you start talking about heaven and earth coming together, you know, Revelation 21, we have resurrected bodies.
Wow.
Throw in 1 John 3 that our body will be like his glorious body. I just kind of think it's a very good idea to think, here I am with my family, my brothers and sisters, and fish fries are optional.
I like it. And what it shows you though is the Lord's heavy emphasis and care and elevation of the physical world. I think it's a misunderstanding of Scripture to think that when you go to heaven, that somehow you're floating as a ghost in some type of spiritual thing. That's not it.
Exactly.
I mean, this is we are talking about a place where there's food, obviously a place where there's bodies. I mean, this is a physical, tangible place. It's supernatural. It's not bound by the laws of entropy and decay and things like that. But it is a physical place, and I think that little nugget in Scripture is actually a very powerful. It's more than just a nugget. It is kind of an anchor to.
Well, plus Zach, it's we were all trained by Bill Smith, who helped lead Dad to Jesus, and Smith. One of the greatest legacies that he left us was an understanding of the bodily resurrection, because a lot of people out there, in Christianity don't have a really clear understanding that, bodies will be raised. Jesus, the clear thing about the understanding of the resurrection is a body has to come forth. And so that idea of glorified flesh is really the key to the good news about what Jesus did for us. And you're exactly right. When you downplay that, or you don't understand that, you're missing one of the key components of why we're saved. It's a powerful thing.
No, that's kind of why, I went there, all through the person I've hunted with the most in my life and fished with, is my dad. So, and just in the past year, I've kind of gone through those memories, and I just remember a lot of things that he has said. And one of them was that he said, in the afterlife, of course, he's probably said this 25 years ago. He said, I look forward, I want to see a new earth without a power line, without any kind of human contribution. He said, I would just love to go and see a cypress break, a chunk of land without any, he said that many times throughout that. And, of course, we went through the same fishing story, which we've talked about many times, Phil and I, which is where that came from. When he said, are there animals? Of course, I did refer to the Acts 10 also when God let down the sheet of animals from heaven. I said, well, he let it down from heaven. Of course, he was trying to convince Peter that it's okay to eat the things that he created. You remember, arise, kill, and eat. But I said, where did the animals, come? The sheep came from heaven, so I don't know, that might be a stretch. But I think it was funny, made a good conversation. But we've had all these conversations, and my dad has always said, I really believe, based on that John 21, that we're going to be together in those settings without any kind of crying, pain. There's no concern for, shooting yourself in the foot while you're duck hunting. Because we jumped from fishing. He's like, well, if the fish is there, why not ducks? And but without that, and I thought, I like this thought.
Yeah, and the idea that you would enjoy that. I spoke at since we were last on the podcast, I spoke at a wild game supper. And, those are really neat events because you got all these guys that get together. They love to hunt. And so they, they brought all this different game in. There was deer. And so the guys are walking around when people are first getting there. And of course, it's an outreach tool just to share Jesus with some guys, that may not know him. But they're walking around with duck bites. They were calling them duck nuggets, Jace. We call them duck fingers, but they were duck nuggets. They were delicious.
They fried them.
And very, very good.
Now, what's the recipe Jay uses? He's gotten on that. He calls them duck
fingers is what he calls it. This is similar. They weren't quite as long as we cut them, but you brine them, then you do a buttermilk soak, and then you fry them.
I think Jay adds a little sour cream. In the batter.
So. He does. Yeah. But really, really good. And so they had 2 big pigs they had cooked. We're not big pigs, small pigs, but they'd cook those. And it was just, it was a feast, but it was all things that, people would hunt to get. And then, of course, I shared Jesus with them, and, which is the whole point of it. And so I do think there is sort of a tie there with this idea of loving the outdoors and yet having this connection to Christ. It's always been a part of us, and mainly because of Dad, obviously. So, which is what we want to talk about today, because we've been. I told Lisa this weekend I was overwhelmed just by how many people. Once we talked about on the podcast, and Jace is right, it was kind of a delay because it took a few days of the podcast to release, and all of a sudden, someone in the media picked it up, and then it was off and running. And so the outpouring of love, of support, of prayer. Just it's almost been overwhelming for me. So I want to talk about that, and both in appreciation, but us just, talk a little bit about the legacy that we continue to live through Dad. So Jace, Missy was recently on the podcast, and I love the line she talked about that Jesus came to earth through a woman, through the womb of a woman, which is an interesting way. He could have come any way he wanted to, but that's the way he chose to come and be a part of us.
It's always been a powerful thought. Being a mom, I think, is the infrastructure to society.
Yeah.
Especially from a moral foundation. And so, we believe every life is precious, and there's nothing greater than being a mom.
So Lisa and I speak all around the country, and I always tell people the reason we celebrate Christmas the way we do is because Jesus not only came through the womb of a woman, but he came in an unplanned pregnancy in a situation that shocked everybody. And so our good friends at Preborn Ministries, they're all about helping young women who face unplanned pregnancies and who feel alone. So Preborn has a lot of great stories about women who have chosen life, and this is one of them. When Valeria found out she was pregnant, she was beyond terrified. She had often dreamt of being a young mom, but as a Christian and single, she now felt overwhelmed by shame and was seriously considering abortion. Valeria began the search for an abortion. It was upon that search that she called a nurse at Preborn Network Clinic who walked with her through her options, including the true reality of ending a baby's life with the abortion pill. When she heard that, she knew she couldn't end her child's life. Valeria chose life and now has a beautiful little girl. This Christmas, for just $28, you can help save a life, and thanks to a special matching grant, your gift is actually doubled. So let's join together and help mothers choose life. To donate securely, dial pound 250 and say the keyword baby. That's pound 250, keyword baby, or go to preborn.com/unashamed. That's preborn.com/unashamed. So I don't know. Did y'all have the same experience as me? Did you get a lot of texts and emails?
I never finished that thought, but once my phone started going off, it pretty much hasn't stopped for the last 72 hours. So my apologies for not getting back to everyone. Meanwhile, one of our little ones that we care for had a surgery also, and it was pretty extensive. So it's been like a hospital ward at my house, and me and my lovely wife, who is a warrior in those types of situations, have been doing that. So we've been preoccupied, but I have checked on Phil, and I was just going to say, because he had been, feeling better, he wanted to go to church this past Sunday, and he did. He didn't do a whole lot, and he didn't say a whole lot, but he came for an hour, and because everybody was like asking me, do you think this is a good idea? And I was like, this stage of Phil's life and with all the struggle, if he wants to go meet at the church building, I think we should do everything in our power to make that happen. So it did, and I think overall it went pretty well from everything I heard.
Yeah, and he had asked Jersey, so the genesis of this we talked about in the podcast. We started a Bible class at our church that Dad wanted to lead, and it's basically just him sharing the gospel. And then he kind of took our old pal Jersey Joe under his wing, and Joe's been there with him through the whole process. And so the last couple of months, since Dad's been down, he turned it over to Joe, who's carried it on. And many of you come to West Monroe, you want to meet some of us, but mainly you want to meet Jesus, which is what we want. Mm-hmm. And he's continued to share that. And so he told Joe, he said, I want to come and see how you're doing with the class, which I love that, because even kind of where Dad is now, he still understands this idea of his investment into all of us. And the way I compared it to is living letters. We're kind of the living Reagan letters of, continuing a legacy of sharing with other people. And so I love that he wanted to do that. And so he did. And the fact he felt good enough to do that was encouraging to me as well. And so just, man, all you guys out there, I heard from people I hadn't heard from in years, past business stuff we've done for the old show and for books. And it's just really neat. I mean, it's reminded me of the wide impact that Dad has had on culture and on people, just from hearing from so many different people.
Well, yeah, he when the last time I visited him before I left, he was kind of thinking about going. And but you got to remember, it's hard for him. I think the struggle is it's hard for him. He's a quarterback. I mean, going back to his days at Louisiana Tech. And I've noticed the biggest struggle in this process from a quarterback background, it's hard to sit on the sidelines. Mm-hmm. And I really think that's the biggest struggle. So even in that moment, he's like, yeah, I think I'm going to go. But he said, now you need to tell, and he couldn't remember his name in the moment, but he was speaking of Jersey Joe. You need to tell him, and he reached down and he picked up his Bible. But somewhere in there, which is part of his condition, he forgot what he was fixing to go with. And so we just kind of had an awkward pause. And I was like, I kind of read his mind, because Phil, he has one main speech that he gives. And so I kind of, summed it up, even though he never said what it was. And he's like, yep, you got it. And he put his Bible back down, which I thought, well, that was a pretty good moment. I read his mind, because I know he has the Spirit, and I know what that class is all about, which is just simply a declaration of who Jesus is. And so I think all of us kind of realize that. I mean, look, it's in a lot of people that have written us, and they've had similar situations, and it is difficult. but you just manage it, and he has the Holy Spirit of God in your, even though he's not necessarily maybe saying a whole lot, you know what he's thinking, which I think is the sign of a good relationship.
Well, I think the word that's come to mind, I actually put this on my Instagram page, is legacy, and it's the thing that Phil is leaving. I pray that I leave that, for my family and my kids. And it hit me, you were just talking about like him going and watching Jersey Joe, which he's discipled Jersey Joe. And he's literally raised him up and discipled him in Jesus. And what's funny is I was thinking about it. We had a podcast. I don't know how far back it was, but it was far back enough to where we were having internal conversations about, Phil's mental status and kind of, something's off, and I remember one particular topic we got into was Daniel chapter 2, where there's that story of the statue, like the dream that King Nebuchadnezzar had that Daniel interprets. And it's this statue that's made up of 4 different types of composite, and it represents these 4 different kingdoms. And the last one's the Roman Empire, that this stone hits and crushes it. And in those days, there's going to be a kingdom set up that can't be shaken or destroyed, which I would argue from a theological and eschatological standpoint in the podcast, that is a anchored text for us. I mean, it really is. Yeah. I mean, that text. And I remember Phil was like a little bit lost in the conversation. And it's so funny though, because this week with all the messages that were coming through and all the prayers and I started looking through my phone and I wanted to go back and look at the stuff I had on my phone that related to Phil, like old videos. I've done a ton of interviews, like the movie stuff. I mean, I interviewed him for all that. And when we were writing the script, and I had all that stuff, and I've got it all saved. And I found this video, and at some point I'll share it with you guys. It's pretty incredible. I had this. This was probably 5 years ago. I got this. It's not a video; it's a voice memo. And I just sat the phone down at Phil's house, and I put it on record. And I said, Phil, tell me about the kingdom of God. Give me the whole, like, give me the 1 hour version. And I've got about 45 minutes of him. I mean, and it's all chapter 2 of Daniel chapter 2. And he's going through that whole thing. And I just thought, what's funny is how much that we learn from him about the kingdom that sometimes you forget, and from Bill Smith too. Someone asked us on Instagram or YouTube or somewhere, did anybody disciple Phil? And yeah, Bill Smith did. And so that legacy just plays down. It just keeps going forward. And so although this is sad to see Phil decline, also I look at Sadie and what she put on her Instagram, and Willie and Jase and us, and there's the tentacles of a life well lived. They go on far beyond this side of eternity, far beyond. We can't even comprehend it. And I thought that was encouraging.
Yeah, I wanted to, Maddie just sent me while you were talking, Zach, a few comments. I wanted to read a couple of them. And this is just indicative of, what we've been receiving all weekend. It says, I'm praying for Phil and the family. They're my friends. I pray hard and I pray often. We aren't just the Unashamed nation. We're the Unashamed family. Which I love that because we talk so much about forever family. This one says, Unashamed Nation sends our love, prayers, and bear hugs to all the Robertsons and extended family. I'm so grateful for this family, especially Phil, whose life is proof we are all redeemed in Christ. Millions of people from all over the globe have been blessed by Phil, and this blessed legacy continues now through his family, which is exactly what we've been saying. And this is another one says, this podcast has led me back to the Lord, and it's got me into my Bible. Phil and the podcast have helped so many people like myself come back to the Lord. We are praying for Phil and the entire family. Phil is a testament to what loving the Lord with all your heart and being unashamed of the gospel looks like. We love you, Phil. So just a sampling of, all the love that's been put out there,
and the prayers. I think about someone sent me an article about Franklin Graham was sent out I don't know where he put it at, but basically asking people to pray for Phil. And I got to think, Jace, that no, he wasn't healed, but he has had some reprieve in his pain, and I got to think that's the prayers of millions of people that went up over the last 4 days.
It's been shocking.
Jase, we talk a lot about cell phones on this podcast, mostly how Dad never has one, but you and I have to stay in contact with the world. Do you ever get in situations where you lose that connection?
I was actually there this morning in the duck blind, and my phone was just like, all I could see was the time. Nothing worked.
See, that was an expensive watch. Well, one of our podcast sponsors, Patriot Mobile, want to make sure that you have coverage. For the last 10 years, they've been America's only Christian conservative wireless provider. They offer dependable nationwide coverage, giving you the ability to access all three major networks. So you get the coverage that you're used to without funding the left's agenda. When you switch to Patriot Mobile, you're letting everyone know you support free speech, religious freedom, the sanctity of life. You also support the Second Amendment, our military, our veterans, and our first responders. If that isn't enough, they have a 100% U.S.-based customer service that makes switching to Patriot Mobile easy. You can keep your number and your phone, or you can upgrade. They'll help you find the best deals and a plan that fits your needs. Just go to patriotmobile.com/Phil, or you can call them at 972-PATRIOT. Right now, you're going to get a free month when you use the offer code PHIL. So join us, switch to America's only Christian conservative mobile provider, Patriot Mobile, by going to patriotmobile.com/Phil, or you can call them at 972-PATRIOT for your free month of service today.
Yeah, his reprieve was shocking to me, which is one reason I decided to, go hunting a couple of days in Kansas. But, I knew it had gone viral somehow because, when I go hunting, especially, where I went is when I say in the middle of nowhere and you don't have a lot of cell phone service. So what was happening is we would move locations or whatever, and then all of a sudden it would just bang, 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 bang. And we actually had some ducks poop on us, which is a phrase of where we were not paying attention, and they literally came through the hole, and everybody was either on their phone or just not paying attention. And so what was funny is I usually never do that, but since it's my dad and I'd gotten just a barrage of messages. One of them was from Don Trump Jr., the president-elect's son. So they gave all their excuses why the ducks were coming, and I was like, well, I was actually reading a text from the president-elect's son, which caused just a very crazy look. And I was like, well, it was about my dad, but it was really nice. And so I knew at that point, I didn't know what had happened, but I thought, well, I guess somebody has picked this story up because there's just too many messages. But I was kind of overwhelmed with, I hadn't had this kind of activity since, I guess when we did our little duck show, right in the beginning, all of a sudden, it just kind of went crazy. But this is a lot better, noble venture, and we're very appreciative of all the comments and prayers. Because I agree with Al. I think in Phil's mind, because he said this many times, he's like, I'll be back hunting with y'all for too long. Every once in a while, he kind of, you see his normal self come out, and he's like, I got a good sermon. I need to get back on that podcast and give you, But we were more thinking just give him some relief. I really was. And even in my prayer, when he was at his lowest point, I was, praying, Lord, if you want to take him, because he was just suffering so much. I said that prayer, which was very difficult. And it was, I think the lowest point was when I literally prayed pretty much all day. And so I threw that in there because I just thought he is absolutely miserable. And then the next time I had seen him, it was quite remarkable. And so thanks to God and all your prayers that he's had I'd say the last few days, it's been a temporary reprieve from the pain and suffering.
Yeah, and I do want to say something about a lot of the headlines that I noticed and saw was, devastating news, devastating. And I get it. No one likes to, hear that something is wrong with you and something you got to deal with in this life. But I just want to give you our perspective. Like everything we've been talking about on this podcast the last few years has been about preparing for crossing over and eternity. I mean, like we've lived our lives that way. And so from our perspective, it's not devastating to know that you're not going to be here forever. That's been the setup the whole time. That's why we're living at such an accelerated pace of trying to get the word out to as many people as possible. So I just want you to know. And then we've also in our family, because we talked about this, Zach's mom, Jan, who was one of the key factors in Dad coming to Christ. I mean, she went through this exact same disease along with some of his other siblings. And so it's not pretty, it's hard, it's difficult, but I'm saying that that's this life. That's the life we live in. That's why we look beyond the temporary and we look to what is unseen and eternal. Yeah. So I just want you to hear that from us and our perspective. Nobody likes getting bad news about someone they love, but Dad has said he spent his whole Christian life saying the resurrection looms large because we're not designed to be here forever. We're going to be in heaven forever. So we just want to impact as many people as we can while we're here. And Zach's made the point. We want to try to help heaven impact earth while we're here, but ultimately we're all going to the hole in the ground. Unless the Lord comes back.
And it does sting. We're not saying death.
Yeah, it does.
And it stings. 1 Corinthians 15 says it stings, but in light of the resurrection that we know is coming, we can say, where, O death, is your sting? Where, O death, is your victory? Death has been swallowed up in victory. And so we stand firm on that.
But I'll give you a sermon off the top of my head that I've never given before. It just popped into my head. We started this podcast talking about John 21 because my dad's always been an outdoorsman. I brought up the football thing. He turned down an NFL career because they play football in duck season. And the first time he said that, people kind of gasped, like, what? But that's who he is. And then he would say, it worked out. And, the famous story about Terry Bradshaw, he was, because then Terry Bradshaw was able to take over the starting position at Louisiana Tech. Well, it worked out pretty well for him. He won 4 Super Bowls, from a worldly perspective. But my dad would always say, I didn't do bad myself doing what I loved to do, which was hunting and fishing and living out in the outdoors. And so when I read that, quoted that verse about that conversation, because this is two of our, Phil and I, it's one of our favorite passages because we were commercial fishermen when we were kids. And Al was a part of that too, but I spent the most time out there just because I had that same kind of weird love for, even though it was back-breaking work, it was just something about those fish and those nets. I just loved it, despite how difficult it was. But when Jesus was sitting there, just imagine all his disciples. He was dead. They had left him. They felt shame about that, and now they put 2 and 2 together. They're actually eating breakfast with a guy who was dead 3 days earlier, and he actually said that statement. Jesus said to them, this is 21:12 of John. Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. And none of the disciples dared ask him, who are you? They knew it was the Lord. And so we kind of had fun about that. But I really believe on the other side of death, I love that statement. When we arrive with our new bodies, come, let's have breakfast. That even my last hunting trip, these 2 days, waking up with the excitement about what's fixed to happen, because duck hunting just is one of the greatest hobbies in my life. Mm-hmm. And, having the pre-hunt breakfast, it's not just being out there, it's the anticipation of what's fixing to happen. And so I really think that statement, if you think about it, in the post afterlife of our existence, seeing all the loved ones that you had before all together, Zach seeing your mom, and having that come, let's have breakfast, we're back together again. Don't ever underestimate that. And I really think he, in the verses that happen after, because we know he's fixing to leave and go to the right hand of God, he reinstates Peter, because Peter had denied him 3 times. And then he actually, to your point, Al, about not being devastated, because I will agree, at no point in this process would I consider myself devastated.
No.
My dad has been a warrior for the Lord, and he's almost 80. I don't know what the average lifespan is, but he has the Holy Spirit of God. So
well, I know one thing Moses said in Psalm 90 that 70 years is typical if you have the strength 80. And so, that was a wise man that lived a long time ago that laid that out for us. And so that's exactly where Dad's at.
Exactly. So then when he gets down to verse 18, after he reinstated, remember he asked Peter 3 times, do you love me? Feed my sheep. In verse 18, Jesus said, now you got to remember, they just had breakfast. He's just reinstated him. And then he says, I tell you the truth. When you were younger, you were dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, follow me. And we know that Jesus is fixed to go to the right hand of God. So what you just allow yourself to imagine what he meant by that. And we all know from the countless studies that we've had and we keep referring to, when Jesus went to the right hand on our behalf and opening the portal to the presence of God for us, he poured out his Spirit. And so then we, in essence, those who surrender to Jesus, who receive God's Spirit, become Jesus through his Spirit on this earth. And that's what he meant by follow me. Go, I showed you. Here's how you live. And we know Peter would get his Spirit, and we know in Acts chapter 2 what he did with it. He stood up and gave the first sermon about Jesus post Jesus' resurrection. But back to verse 20 in John, Peter turned and saw that the disciple whom Jesus loved was following them. Speaking of John, this was the one who had leaned back against Jesus at the supper and said, Lord, who is going to betray you? When Peter saw him, he asked, Lord, what about him? So now we're talking about death. Even though Jesus has just been raised from the dead and he tells Peter to follow him after he's reinstated, now they're talking about Jesus is discussing their death. And I think he's giving them a picture of, that doesn't mean you're not going to die. I need you to be me until your death. But he's planted this seed. There's going to be a moment that we're going to have breakfast together on the side of this again. Jesus answered, if I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? You must follow me. Because of this, the rumor spread among the brothers that this disciple would not die. But Jesus did not say that he would not die. He only said, if I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? And I think in our current circumstance, this is a good chapter to really think about. This is the way this works. And you think of verses like Romans 8:11 that says, if the same Spirit of Christ is living in you, he who gave life to Jesus' mortal body will also raise your bodies.
There's also something, Jase, to be said about his example and how we all have followed that example. I always say, from our perspective, when Jesus ascended and left here, from our perspective, I'm like, well, I wish he would have just stayed, because we would have been in his presence all the time, and we wouldn't have to worry about false teaching because he would always be there to correct things. And, we've been looking for that situation, even though we've got the Holy Spirit living in us, which he said would be better once he left, and he was right. But, from a human perspective, we're like, just don't go. We don't ever want to say, see you later. We don't ever want to say, wait, we want it all right now. But his example was this: I have a task for you, just like I had a task when I came here. And the task is you're preparing for eternity by now impacting other people with eternity. And I can't help but think about what Paul told Timothy, because I spent a lot of time, these last few weeks pondering that relationship. And I mentioned this before. When I was asked to speak at our mentor, Bill Smith's funeral, the one who I mentioned earlier, who led Dad to Christ, I was like, man, I'm not worthy to even be speaking. And then it hit me. I was like, well, wait a minute, though. I'm Timothy to his Paul. He's trained me and taught me and discipled me for moments just like this. And so when I realized that, I realized what an honor it is to live out someone's blessing that they brought into your life. And so in 2 Timothy 4, verse 6, I love how Paul is like closing out his thoughts to Timothy, because he knows. He knows in his spirit that it's coming. He is right there about to cross over. And we know what happened to him, because of history. They cut his head off because of his faith, and yet he went all the way with it. And he's told Timothy in verse 6, I am already being poured out like a drink offering, and the time has come for my departure. So he knew he was right there. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day, and not only to me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing. And so that standard continues on to this very day. And so all of us, when we get to this point where we're ready to cross over, that's my final speech. That's the last words I want to be able to say, to be able to continue to be a blessing. You fight the fight, you keep the faith, you impact other people, and then okay, we've crossed. Now all we're waiting on is the final resurrection.
One thing that encourages me, when I go through, because I did go through this with my mom, and lost her to the exact same disease, and watched the progression. Also, we've all had pain in our life and lost other ones, and gone through things. And I love that Jase brought that verse up. And it's it kind of stings a little bit when you read it. Like, what business is that of yours? Like you're trying to question God, and he's like, none of your business. When some of these things we look into. But I love this other verse in Ecclesiastes, because I think it does speak to this longing for eternity, right? There is this thing in us that's like trying to make sense of this. And I got those were some of the texts I got. People that knew my family well, knew Phil well, just angry. Like, I hate this, and I'm questioning this. And I think what that is there is a longing in our hearts that the writer of Ecclesiastes says that he has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the hearts of men, yet they cannot fathom the work that God has done from beginning to end. So there is this thing in our heart, like we're longing for eternity. God set that in us. He put that in our hearts. And sometimes what we do, though, is we try to ignore that because the pain of death and sickness and all that. But the psalmist says, teach me, Lord, to number my days. We sing a song that has that in the lyrics. That's the psalmist says, teach me, Lord, to number my days. Mm-hmm. And I think what that does is it brings us back to that reality. What is that inner longing in us? What is that? I'm longing for eternity. Yet I don't know what God has done from beginning to end. Who am I? Who am I to question him? And who am I to, I don't know. I'm not God, but I do know that he's faithful. And I do know that he is a God that fulfills his covenant with his people. And God has made a covenant that we will have the ability to, or the privilege to be in his presence for eternity. And that can start right here today, as Jesus defined eternity in John 17:3, is to know him. That's the promise.
Yeah, well, I guess I'll go down this road. There was one time in my life that I was angry with God, and even though I had surrendered to Jesus, at 14, and really for 2 years just tried to survive, I guess. And but I had met a girl who, and it wasn't a romantic relationship. I was the shortest kid in the 9th grade, and she was the tallest kid. And so we were quite the pair. But the only reason that we had a great relationship was because of our faith. She was the only person in my class that was unashamed of Jesus. And so we just became pretty much best friends throughout high school, even though after the 9th grade, she went to another school and I went, I went to West Monroe High School. And so she really helped me. And her name was Angel Gist. And so when she graduated in her freshman year, she was killed in a car wreck. And Al, I was actually with you in Baton Rouge. And I was mad at you for about 2 years because when it didn't happen, when it happened, y'all didn't tell me because it happened right when we were there. I think that was the age before cell phones and all that.
Yeah, it was.
And I don't think y'all really realized how close we were. So I mean to say I was devastated. And I was devastated for years. And so really, because I thought, well, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. That was the only person I knew. Of course, my faith had grown somewhat since meeting her, but I was just so angry. And it really wasn't until our grandpa died, and Mac Owen, of all people, who Phil, speaking of legacy, is another guy that he discipled, and look where he's at now. He was on a podcast not too long ago. He's the head of what is he? I don't want to
Celebrate Recovery.
Recovery.
Celebrate Recovery. But when our grandpa died, I was living beside Mac at that time, and he came down, and even though we knew our grandpa we were going to see him again. It's just, it was devastating in the moment. And I would use that word because it just, all the memories come crashing forth. And I was actually just sitting on the swing of my house, just kind of sad about it. And I just looked up and there he was. And so he sat down and he turned to Hebrews 11, which I'm there now. And here's this chapter with all these, heroes of the faith that the Hebrew writer laid out. And when it gets down to the end, it says God had planned, which is a very key phrase in verse 4. God had planned something better for us so that only together with us would they be made perfect. And, theologically, we tie in how Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection not only went forward for us, it went backwards for them. But those first 3 words is kind of what he stressed. And so then when he read Hebrews 12, where it said, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus. So what he did was, in that moment, he had over in the margins, he had all these names. And he wrote, my grandpa's name beside all the other names as the witnesses, which it was really moving and, profound for me, because then I just went ahead and put my grandpa's name and I put Angel's name, which she had died years earlier. But I just thought, God's got a plan on this. There's no doubt I'm gonna see this woman again. And so what I didn't know is when I wrote that book, Good Call, a few years ago, I told that story, and it was the first time I'd ever gone public about it. But I never thought about what her family was going to think if they read my book. And so I actually had to call my counselor buddy to go with me, because I said, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to handle this, because they wanted to meet with me. And old Trent Langoffer went with me. It was very emotional. And, they gave me her freshman jersey and they gave me her Bible.
And I think that's the hardest part, Jase. When Zach talked about a certain number of days, when the days are less than we think they should be because it's young, it obviously is so much more, hurtful to us to deal with that. But ultimately, we trust God, whether it's young, whether it's middle, whether it's old. But we all want to live a life, whatever that life is. We're not guaranteed any time. Anything can happen. Angel's case, it was a car accident. It could be anything. We want to be ready. And really, that's what this podcast is about. You live unashamed to be ready for the moments. And that's the power of what we do. And I do want to say this. We just got a couple of minutes left. And we wanted to spend this podcast talking about the appreciation, the legacy that we live, and a lot of lives. I'm so glad you brought up Angel Jase. All of us could think about different people that have impacted. The day before our grandpa died, Charlie Murray died in his sleep at 32 years old. And this was another young man that had such a huge blessing. And so all these people impacted us. But I wanted to let you know that we are relaying these messages that you're sending to mom and dad, and they are so appreciative of the outpouring of love for them, their legacy, everything that they mean to all of you guys. So just know that we share those with them. As we all know, Dad's famously not connected to tech, but he does love to hear that out there in computer land, as he puts it, there are people that are expressing their love and their appreciation for everything that he's meant to them in their lives. And so we've told you before, we love those prayers. The prayers have definitely given him some peace while he's dealing with this, especially from the pain. And so we pray that you continue to pray for that. Obviously, we don't know how much time he has left, and it may be a while, and that'll be a blessing. And who knows, maybe he'll be able to even have some moments where he can share some of what's going on with him too. So we don't sell God short on anything, but we want to let you know we live our lives for something better, and we want to be the witnesses while we're here. When we cross over, maybe they'll write our name in the Bible somewhere, Jase, because we've impacted people. Yeah. And so really that's all we can ask for, is to be blessed by that. So just a big thank you to Unashamed Nation. And as one of the listeners said, Unashamed family, because that's what you guys are. It's been a great encouragement to us. We're not devastated. Obviously, it's difficult to go through this, as it is with so many of you out there. So many of you have shared that with us, and we just appreciate you. We love you. We love Dad, obviously, and the impact that he has. We miss him not being here to give us his wisdom. But all we can do is be Timothy to his Paul and continue to share with you what impacted us. So that's what we're going to do, and we won't stop.
Yeah, and exactly. And I think that's the first time I've actually become emotional in a podcast, but I went from being angry to tears of excitement, imagining having breakfast with people like Angel and my grandpa, and that's what we believe.
Yes.
And I just wanted to finish out by saying later in life, I connected with Angel's sister, and we have done many ventures in the name of Jesus to help people. So we pass her legacy, and that's kind of been the theme of this. And so I think that's the way God designed it. So when you read that God's got a plan, realize this is what's supposed to happen to get people to realize that Jesus came here to save us all. And there's no shame in what's going to happen on the other side. So we're grateful and thankful.
Absolutely. Love you guys. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Unashamed podcast. Help us out by rating us on iTunes. And don't miss an episode by subscribing on YouTube, and be sure to click that little bell to get notified about new episodes. And for even more content that you won't get anywhere else, subscribe to Blaze TV at blazetv.com/unashamed.